Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Andrew Missick, author of The Further Acts of the Apostles According to Abdius of Babylon. And I want to make some quick comments about an ancient writing called there's two versions of it. One's called the Recognitions of Clement. The other one's called the Homilies of Clement. And the reason why this is significant is it's a life of the Apostle Peter, but it's written by the Ebionites, which is an ancient sect of Jewish Christians. So there's been a lot of interest in Jewish Christianity and what Jewish Christianity would have been like. And of course, you have the Messianic movement, really picked up speed since the late 60s. And there's all kinds of Messianic congregations that have popped up all over the nation, the world, people trying to reconnect with the Jewish roots of Christianity. So it seems like there'd be a lot of interest in an Acts of the Apostles written by Jewish Christians. So I recently was watching this podcast, and this man's interviewing a Bible scholar and asking about the homilies of Clement or the recognitions of Clement. And what he says is, well, I don't really know about it, but I don't think it's very important because it's got ridiculous stories in it, and it's late. So I looked at the date of it, and some scholars date it to the mid 300s. And so he says, well, it's got ridiculous stories in it, and it's from the fourth century, so it's doesn't have any real historical significance. So he didn't bother reading it. Well, he was mistaken. It is very, very important. And firstly, it seems to be based on much older writings. And there's a theory of, I think it's Epiphanius, one of these church fathers he's wrote about the condemning different heresies. And he mentioned a book used by Jewish Christians called The Ascents of James. So some scholars date the Ascents of James the early second century. And you also have in the mid second century, around the year 150, they call it Kurgamata Petro, or the teachings of Peter. And this is another Ebionite work. So what we have is a Jewish Christian writing in the 300s, drawing upon much more ancient sources from his community and incorporating them into his work. So he's drawing on ancient traditions and far older writings. And plus, this is a witness of an ancient sect of Christianity that disappeared. Now, this book that was written probably in the 300s, based on a book written around the year 150, that's when a lot of these apocryphal Acts, the apostles, are being written, like the Acts of John, the Acts of Peter. They call these Lucius Turinus Acts because Lucius Turinus is supposed to have been an apostle of John, and he's writing these apocryphal Acts, the Acts of John, the Acts of Peter, the Acts of Paul, the Acts of Thomas, and the Acts of Andrew. And we also have an Acts of Philip, representing the same tradition as well. And scholars don't deny that this Lucius Turinus existed, but they think there was different authors, and we don't really know for certain. You just have these theories. So that means around the time that these ancient Acts of the Apostles are being written, and if you look at the Acts of Paul, for instance, scholars believe that that's based on oral tradition, which means somebody's grandfather, father, great-grandfather, they passed down. They'd say Paul came to our community, and so this is very ancient oral traditions that are confined to writing in the Acts of Paul. So these, if you look at them, they obviously have a lot of legendary elements, but they could contain some historical information. They're not historical documents, but they also reflect Christianity as it was, according to Bible scholars and the scholars of this literature. They're a snapshot of Christianity as existed when these communities confined these traditions and legends and stories to writing. So there's orthodox elements and there's like quasi-Gnostic elements in it because they think that's just reflective of how Christianity was practiced and preached at that time before, I guess these heretical issues needed to be, what would you call it, maybe adjudicated. So it's very interesting, very interesting. All these apocryphal Acts are very interesting. So around the time that these early Acts of the Apostles are being written down, the doctrine of Peter is written down, and that becomes the core of the Clementine homilies. And so what are these two books about? So what happened is a Jewish Christian in the 300s takes the teaching of Peter, Pergamata Petro, and other ancient Jewish Christian writings like the Ascents of James and things like that. They call it the basic writing. And he writes, if you want to read these, the recognitions of Clement and the homilies of Clement, it's a little long. There is an abridged edition, but it was abridged a long time ago by Aramaic Christians. And I think it's Stanley Jones has a